Culture and location are closely intertwined. Early human communities were shaped by factors like climate, soil quality, and available resources. These elements influenced the kind of cultures that could develop. In return, culture had a significant impact on the physical environment, leaving traces that reflected the values, ideas, and needs of the community. Some communities, facing limited resources, led migratory lives with temporary settlements, and no specific buildings for tasks like conflict resolution. Others, with more resources, established urban centers with institutions like laws, courts, markets, and government buildings. Different types of environments led to different cultural worlds. Humans transformed the physical landscape to suit their needs, evolving from mud to brick, then to buildings, and finally to meaningful institutions. For instance, when you visit Rome today, scattered stones in the old Forum may seem meaningless, but when imagined in their original places, they represent vibrant institutions that shaped the legal, political, and religious culture of the ancient city. Cultural geography emphasizes how we not only adapt to our surroundings, but also actively reshape them to reflect our thoughts, ideals, and values. The interaction between human culture and the physical environment is a two-way process. The type of community that forms in response to an environment influences its cultural practices. These practices, in turn, transform the physical environment, turning it into a human-made landscape. Migratory communities primarily relied on oral traditions, passing down wisdom and values through spoken stories and songs. In contrast, highly organized societies like ancient China developed written systems to transmit their institutionalized culture, which emphasized values like respect for authority and self-restraint. Culture has spatial dimensions. It's evident in the distribution of populations across different regions, leading to distinct cultural differences. Culture also spreads spatially through information transmission, influencing the landscape with specific ideas and customs. For example, settlers in North America introduced a new religious ideology, eventually replacing indigenous beliefs. Additionally, culture can involve power dynamics, where one region's influence is imposed on another, as seen in the dominance of the Frankish language over regional languages in France. A community's way of life is influenced by its location. Urban Caribbeans in cities like London or New York have different lifestyles compared to rural Indians, affecting aspects like clothing, music, and access to cultural resources. Economic disparities can also lead to varying ways of life within the same location, such as the contrast between a luxury apartment dweller on the Upper East Side of Manhattan and a homeless person on the streets below. Culture and location are closely linked. Different environments, like climate and available resources, influenced early human communities and the cultures that developed. Culture, in turn, shaped the physical surroundings, reflecting the values and needs of the community. Some communities were nomadic due to limited resources, while others with more resources built settled urban centers with institutions like laws, markets, and government buildings. Culture also helps us understand and navigate the world around us. It gives meaning to things like stop signs, gestures, and words. This interpretation of cultural symbols can vary by location. For example, A movie like Rambo may be seen differently in Western and Asian contexts. Culture is our perspective, shaped by factors like gender, personality, community, and race. It's also influenced by our geographic location. Economically, culture plays a role in spatial transformations. For instance, when organizations like the International Monetary Fund require local farmers to compete with large corporations, it leads to significant changes in the cultural and physical landscape. Small farms disappear, impacting entire communities. Culture is a tool we use to bring order to a natural world that can be chaotic and unpredictable. When we alter a natural landscape through construction or reshaping, we infuse it with our intentions and ideas. This transforms it from a simple physical object into a meaningful space. Like a stop sign, a landscape becomes a symbol with embedded ideas, even though it's a tangible object. To understand these meanings, we must interpret and translate them, much like reading a book. Moving through a built environment is akin to reading a text. It's a collection of signs with meanings derived from the intentions of those who designed it, and the cultural ideals behind those intentions. By living in this environment, we absorb these meanings and adapt our behavior accordingly. Landscapes are not only places of meaning, but also sites where economic and power dynamics are evident. Landscapes carry various cultural meanings, be they historical, economic, ideological, or political. They are products of human creation, serving the needs of a specific community. However, this we is not uniform. Our communities are divided by factors like gender, race, income, and belief, and these divisions are reflected in the cultural landscapes we create. For instance, the layout of Greek houses reflected gender hierarchies, while the stark contrast between wealthy areas and lower-income neighborhoods in cities like Philadelphia highlights economic and racial disparities. Cultural history is reflected in landscapes, showing the impact of past choices and values. For example, the American superhighway system, established in the 1950s, prioritized car production over less profitable public transportation. This influenced American culture to become car-centric, unlike Europe where public transportation was safeguarded. Changes in landscapes indicate shifts in cultures or within the same culture. As the U.S. urbanized, farmland around cities was replaced by suburban housing, and later by large industrial areas. In areas undergoing gentrification, renovation to attract wealthier residents, architectural details of older buildings reflect an earlier culture. These details, often ornate and decorative, symbolize a time when wealth allowed for lavish decoration. The renovated counterparts focus on clean lines and efficiency, aligning with a newer culture valuing cost reduction, often at the expense of labor. This is evident in the use of cost-effective materials like metal instead of traditional brick construction. Human labor shapes landscapes over time, resulting in layered meanings. Each generation adds its own significance on top of previous ones. Urban landscapes may feature diverse buildings, each representing distinct historical meanings. For instance, outside Back Bay Station in Boston, you'll find 19th-century red brick houses that were once single-family homes for the newly affluent. Many bear Christian crosses, reflecting the religious values of that era. Today, These houses have been divided into apartments for young urban professionals, altering their original purpose and meaning as physical structures.